In this lecture segment, we are talking about art and religion in 16th century Europe. We'll focus on two 16th century paintings and a Baroque ceiling painting. The 16th century sees dramatic changes that have a profound and long-lasting impact on life and art. Up until this point, the Catholic Church had been the only church in Western Europe and was a unifying force after the fall of the Roman Empire. But the Church receives criticism that prompts reform and the rise of new religious groups, Protestant religions. And we end up with a Europe, as you see in this map, that is divided religiously, with Protestant religions in the north and Catholicism in the south. Art plays a key role in both the push for Reformation and in the Catholic Church's response to Reformation. Gutenberg's movable type was used to share ideas in printed form and accelerates movement away from the Church. It also allowed for the translation and distribution of the Bible in the vernacular, or the everyday languages people spoke, like German and English. Protestant religions remove imagery from religious practice and say that images have no place in worship, which sparks the destruction of religious imagery during the iconoclastic riots. Reformers also state that saints and Mary should not be prayed to and that relics have no power. What a significant change from the centuries of art we've seen centered around saints and relics. Art of the later 16th century reflects the turbulence and shifting character of the period. In Northern Europe, we see a sharp decline in religious art because many locations no longer had religious imagery in churches. We see scenes of everyday life instead, like this example by the Flemish artist Peter Bruegel the Elder, that shows a winter scene in a series of paintings depicting the seasons. This was commissioned by a banker in Antwerp for his home. Like we saw with the Tréricheur, we see seasonal tasks in a landscape with loads of northern detail in a setting that captures the bone-biting chill of winter in the Low Countries. It is not a religious scene. It gives attention to the everyday pursuits of regular people, not the grand stories of religion. In Italy, a fascinating new style develops near the end of Raphael's abbreviated life, mannered art. This altarpiece is in situ, meaning in the original location where it was designed to be, in a church in Florence, in a space just behind this window. It's by Pontormo, an artist from the Florence area, who studied all of the Italian Renaissance works we've studied. This work was made for a fancy private chapel in a church, about 15 years after Raphael's philosophy fresco, and about 10 years after the start of the Reformation, and the style of Italian art has shifted. This work is odd. Gone is linear perspective carefully leading us to a vanishing point. Instead, we have this donut-shaped composition and a void in the middle, and stacked figures like we saw with Cimabue. The figures wear oddly juxtaposed colors that are similar to the hues we see in the philosophy fresco, but are brought together in unusual ways, and the figures themselves seem to defy gravity, as Pontormo uses his knowledge of anatomy and figure drawing, Florentine disegno, to create figures that have weight, but barely seem to support that weight, like this figure here, who impossibly supports the body of Christ on his tippy toes. And there's a lack of clarity in the iconography. It's hard to tell what scene is being shown. We tend to think that it is right before or right after the Pietà, as if Christ's body is on its way to Mary's lap or has just left her lap. We end up with an ambiguous work of art that is beautiful in its oddness. We see the heritage of innovation and experimentation of the Renaissance continuing, but the turbulence of this period with war and conflict may have contributed to some of the stylistic shifts in art we see over the course of the 16th century. In this map, we see that what was once entirely Catholic is now broken up into different religions. The Catholic Church responds to the Reformation and the emergence of new religions with the Counter-Reformation, a movement that made reforms and stressed the authority of the Church. At a meeting called the Council of Trent, they developed strategies for addressing problems and made a plan for how art could be used to bring people back to the Church and keep them in the Church. They decide that images should play a more important role than ever in helping worshippers feel an emotional and spiritual response. They are especially interested in art that emphasizes Christ and his giving of authority directly to St. Peter, the first pope. They want art that shows saints and Mary, to teach people that saints are necessary as intercessors in salvation. They say art should be clear, show easily identifiable stories, that it should instruct. They want works of art that are naturalistic. They do not want the everyday. And most importantly, art should be uplifting and help the viewer have an emotional experience that connects them to the Church. They need to feel it and be witness to miracles through art. A clear example of this type of experience the Church wanted worshippers to have was painted in the 1690s in Rome by a Jesuit artist. The Jesuit order of the Catholic Church was founded to combat Protestantism, fight heresy, and do international missionary work. This artist painted the fresco in a new Roman church dedicated to St. Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits. Pozzo took all the lessons of the Renaissance perspective and ceiling painting and maximized them here to create a grand vision. From one perfect spot on the floor of the church, the viewer gazes up to the ceiling and feels that a heavenly vision is before their view as they watch St. Ignatius be taken into heaven, as representations of the peoples of the world celebrate the saint. It reminds me of the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall in the Harry Potter books, as if the ceiling does not exist and instead reveals a reality outside the structure. He painted fictive architecture to make it look like the building extended upwards, a massive trompe-l'oeil painting that makes the viewer a witness to heaven, an effective Counter-Reformation work of art. As we move through the Baroque or 17th century and look at works of art from both Protestant and Catholic contexts, we'll explore how that art suits the taste and preferences of its viewers and the wishes of the secular and religious power in each area.